With regards to Aqeedah in general. So those are the things I wanted to mention. And the third thing I wanted to mention was, I know there's a lot of stuff I put into the folder, and I know it can be quite overwhelming and daunting and things like that. If you feel my notes, which are mainly sort of my own philosophical ramblings, things that pop into my head when I was reading the text, I jot them down, and they could be some of it can be very technical. If you feel all the notes are not helpful, leave them. Don't worry about them. What I'm more interested in is how the text jumps out to you. So when you read the Risalah Qudsiyyah, how does it appear to you? What jumps out for you? What are the things that you find interesting or intriguing, or perhaps that you don't even agree with? Jot them down, and that's really what I want to get. I want to get sort of stuck into. I want people's thoughts about the text, how they react with the text. And like I said, I'm not someone who is here to exclude anyone, attack anyone. That's not my style. It's never been my style. And I hope people weren't expecting that from the course. It's not here to bash anyone, bash a particular theological stance or methodology. We're just trying to understand how Imam al-Ghazali framed theology and how he understood the essentials of Aqeedah to be. So those are really some of the key points. Now, in terms of the fourth and final preliminary point, the kind of structure that I'm using is, some years ago, I'd written a kind of a philosophical commentary on the Risalah, and I refer to that a lot in the notes. If you don't have the book, don't worry, inshallah, we'll make it available, I'm sure. But don't worry about if you don't want to buy the book. And barakallahu fiqh for those who bought the book. Don't worry about that. A lot of my notes will cover there should be sufficient material within the Google folder for you to get stuck into and sort of help you think about the text. So don't worry about if you don't have the book. It's not really important. The important thing is the text, because the philosophical commentary is just my thoughts about what I feel the text is trying to say, and giving it some kind of philosophical dressing. Now, a lot of my notes, they are based on analytic philosophy of religion. So it can be technical in places, like I said. If it's not your thing, if squiggly lines, boxes and diamonds and letters are not your thing, don't worry about it. Honestly, that's just technical machinery that I just put in there when it comes up into my head. For those of you who are into the analytic method, help me improve my notes, pick out the errors in there, help me correct them, add your own thoughts and arguments, and I want it to be kind of a collaborative effort. But anyone who's not interested in the analytic stuff, don't worry. Honestly, don't worry. Okay, so having said some of these preliminaries, let me get stuck into jump straight into the outline for today. What I want to cover, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is one, the Risalah Qudsiyyah, aims, purposes, what's the audience, and what are some of the key features of this text. And then I want to get your quick reflection on those points. Second, I want to talk about ilmul kalam, and what is the method of ilmul kalam, what is it? And then some of the problems related to ilmul kalam as a methodology in theology. And then I want to start a rukn al-awwal, the first pillar that Ghazali, because Ghazali puts out, sets out 4 pillars he thinks that are the foundations of the creed. And then each of these pillars have 10 foundations. So I'll go through that inshallah very quickly. So hopefully we will start a rukn al-awwal, the first pillar, and we will talk about that. I think we'll get to al-asl al-thalith, the third foundation. I think that's probably realistic how far we're going to get within the hour. And then these discussion points you should be able to see on the screen. I want you to think about, as I go through the Risalah Qudsiyyah sort of textual analysis, I want you to think about what is orthodoxy and who defines it, because we want to know who Ghazali is linking orthodoxy to. How reliable, the second question is, how reliable is fitra epistemology? So Ghazali, before he talks about giving demonstrative proof, i.e. a burhan, for the huduth al-alam, the temporal origination of the world, i.e. the world being created at a point in time, before he gives that argument, he thinks they're not, that's primarily, that's not what's needed. And I want us to think about that and maybe have a little discussion about that. Do we ever need proofs? Yeah. So that will naturally take us on to what are proofs? What are barahin? What is a hujjah? And are hujjah compelling? Can a hujjah ever be compelling? Can a burhan be qati'? Yeah. So things like that. The third and the fourth and final discussion point is, and I think this is the linchpin really of the kalam sort of premise for the temporal origination of the world, and that is كل ما لا يخلو من الحوادث فهو حادث. This is a principle Ghazali uses a few times in the Risalah when it comes to Allah's attributes. So I want us to break down and think, is this a sound principle? Because in a recent article by Professor Ayman Shahada, he sketches out, and I put this article in the Google folder, by the way. So he sketches a historical antagonism towards this principle from Christian mutakallimun and theologians, from philosopher like Ibn Sina and other theologians within the sort of non-kalam tradition like Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. So they attack this principle, and in the handout that I put in Google folder on the mereology kalam proof, the mereology related to the kalam proof for the temporal origination of the world, I go through why people who identify as Athari or Salafi Wahhabi, the ulama of that camp, why they think the doctrine of huduth al-ajsam, or the origination of the temporal origination of bodies, that is one of the most catastrophic theological principles to have come out of the mutakallimun camp. So I want us to discuss this. Nothing is off limits in this session, so feel free to jump in whenever you want. So let me just pause there to see if anyone's got any questions, and then we'll get straight back into reading the text.
So if anybody has questions, just put on the chat, I have a question, and then Dr. Alf, I think if you could just pick. Okay, give permission to people to turn on their mic once you've seen.
Let me just go to the let me
chat.
just go. Yeah, let me go to the chat. Sorry. Right. So.
No, I think. No, nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it seems clear. I think everybody's right.
Brilliant. All right. So I'm just going to put up the Risalah Qudsiyyah in Arabic. So those of you who've got access to Google Drive, you might want to pull up the notes from there if you want. We're in note 1. I haven't put up the fourth note. I put up notes to Rukn al-Awwal, Rukn al-Thani, Rukn al-Thalith, just Rukn al-Rabi'. I just have to re-edit and put it up. For those of you who have the Jerusalem Epistle, my philosophical commentary on it, you can open that up to the Arabic text and get started. So let me just find. I should still be broadcasting, I think.
You're not presenting at the moment, Doc. So if you could
I'm not. Okay. All right. Let me just find it first of all, the Arabic, so you lot can see it. Sorry, guys. Give me a second. Okay, so start broadcast. So you lot should be able to see an Arabic text in front of you, al-Risalah Qudsiyyah.
Yeah, it's up.
Let me know if that's clear. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So what I'm probably not going to do, because of the interest of time, is I would love to read through it, but I'll be honest with you, I don't have an ijazah back to Hujjat al-Islam on this text. I don't know anyone who has. If they do, that'd be brilliant. Put me into your isnad. I would love that. So, you know, I would love to have read, but maybe we can do a qira'ah of the matan, but there another time. But there are parts that I will be reading, just so we go along. Right. So the text is in front of you. That's brilliant. Let me go through a few things about the Risalah Qudsiyyah. Ghazali wrote it, rahimahullah, while, you know, in the city of al-Quds, and he mentions that, and we know that because that's what he says in the Iḥyāʻ. And he was in a zawiya there, in a Sufi lodge while he was there, and it was called Babul Rahmah. But I think some of the historical reports mention that it was then called the Ghazālī because he was there for so long, and he, you know, he was teaching lots of things there, and this is where he sort of penned this particular Risalah. Ghazali believes that this creed, this Aqeedah text, this Risalah, is Sunni, obviously, and it's for the Muslim, the general masses. It is technical. It is in technical in places, but it's much simpler than a lot of the other theological tracts that he's written. And you know, some even say it's, you know, it's enough for high school kids. It's easy to memorize. It's very short. So it's a simplified text. Doesn't go through a lot of elaborate details, and I'll mention that perhaps why he doesn't go through the details now. But Ghazali is written in a lot of different areas. So he's written in theology, usul al-fiqh, jurisprudence. He's written in fiqh. He's written in tasawwuf. He's written in mantiq and falsafa. So this falls under usul ad-dīn or ilm al-kalam or theology. Yeah. And Ghazali believes that this text, Risalah Qudsiyyah, encapsulates everything related to the shahadatain, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. So he believes that this profession of faith, that shahada, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, that is encapsulated by this Risalah. So the La ilaha illallah part, that captures the first three parts of the Risalah, which is knowledge, ma'rifatullah, the ma'rifah sifatillah, that's the second, ma'rifati af'alillah, and the knowledge of divine actions. So knowledge of Allah, knowledge of his attributes, the knowledge of his actions, and then the fourth part is the knowledge of what the Prophet ﷺ brought, i.e. revelation. So he believes that the Shahada has these four components, and his Risalah Qudsiyyah encapsulates these four components in an authentic way. Now each rukun, or each part or component, has for him 10 parts or 10 foundations or usul, and that gives a total of 40. Now there might be some religious significance of why he chooses arba'een, and some commentators have mentioned that because 40 for the ulama of tasawwuf, you know, signifies completion, comprehensiveness. So that could be a reason why he's made it as 40. Allahu a'lam. But that could be a possible reason why he's put it in that structure. The aim of the Risalah, according to Hujjat al-Islam himself, is that it's there to give you the lawami'ul adillah. It's to give you the lawami'ul adillah. It's to give you the sort of flashes of what the Aqeedah is. And then if somebody wants the details of it, he tells us they should refer to the al-iqtisād fil i'tiqād, and I think Sidi Shuaib has taught that before, so it'd be great to get his input on that. So the Risalah Qudsiyyah is either a redaction of, a contraction of al-iqtisād fil i'tiqād, or al-iqtisād fil i'tiqād is an amplification of, or a larger reference work for Risalah al-Qudsiyyah. Whichever way, I'm not sure. Maybe the Risalah, the Iqtisād fil i'tiqād is an expansion of the Risalah Qudsiyyah, possibly. So the aim then is to give sufficient adillah or sufficient proof for each of these areas of the Aqeedah. Sometimes Ghazali doesn't even bother with detailed arguments. He just gives an analogy and feels that's necessary, and that's it. He moves on. So the Risalah Qudsiyyah isn't going to give you the absolute depth that you're looking for, like in al-Iqtisād fil i'tiqād, for example, because it's just an introductory matan. Yeah. So the other aim of the Risalah Qudsiyyah is to show what are the erroneous theological positions or stances. It's interesting, he doesn't mention anyone by name, but his main adversary, unsurprisingly, are the Mu'tazila. So he wants to show in the Risalah what is the boundary demarcation of orthodox Sunni creed and heretical creed. And he does lambast the Mu'tazila, and in parts he's quite ad hominem towards them. And the main areas, or the contestation sites, i.e. the areas where he's really at loggerheads with them, is on the Ru'yatullah, the Visio Day, obviously the Sifat, because he believes the Mu'tazila just misunderstood the Sifat, the notion of Qada and Qadar, which is not surprising, divine fairness, divine obligations, i.e. is Allah obligated to actually do anything, and then the ethics. Is morality a part of reality, or is it grounded in the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So these are some of the areas where he really gets on, he really attacks the Mu'tazila. And there are times when, like I said, it's very ad hominem and polemical. What's the manhaj? What's the methodology? And this is going to lead me to my second point, which is the methodology of ilm al-kalam. But this is a very condensed text. Obviously, it's not written like the larger works of ilm al-kalam, but it follows the methodology of kalam. And I will outline what the methodology of kalam is in just a moment. So the style is to lay out the core, the statement of the creed, the article of the creed, and then give some expansion or explanation or bayan of it. Yeah. And sometimes this bayan can be in the form of formal arguments. Sometimes it could be just mere explanatory. Sometimes it could just be just a sentence. Like I said, Ghazali is not writing this as some kind of comprehensive, detailed Risalah. He's just giving you a core argument justifying each of these foundations. But he does use syllogistic proof. He uses logic. He uses rational argument. And so, this clearly falls within the methodology of kalam. Finally, how was the Risalah Qudsiyyah received? Well, we know that it was taught on the popular level, and it was quite popularly received. It reached as far as Al-Andalus, because one of the Wa'idh, Ash-Shantarini, he uses this text. And we know it's quite interesting because Iḥyāʻ had mixed reception in Al-Andalus, isn't it? I mean, it wasn't considered to be as great by quite a lot of scholars, to the fact that it was burnt in many quarters. So, but the Risalah Qudsiyyah did have a favour amongst the ulama, a contingent of the ulama in Al-Andalus. So obviously it reached beyond the eastern lands into the western lands. So that's pretty much the overview of the text. I want you to think about, there's a list of questions that I put in the Google Drive. I want you to think about, the text of Risalah, why it's composed in this way, why is Ghazali saying what he's saying, and in the manner that he's saying it in this text. So I won't go into that now, but if you have questions or you have your own points, please feel free to throw it in. Right, very quickly, the methodology of kalam. Ilm al-kalam, or ilm al-nazar, or ilm al-tawheed, ilm usul ad-dīn, whatever you want to call it, is a way of doing theology that primarily begins with and optimism in the aql. And what we mean by that is it begins with a confidence in the aql being able to understand truth. Not only truths about reality, but the aql can give us religious insights, or it can offer evidence for strengthening or even proving religious claims. Yeah. So there's a confidence in the aql to be able to uncover truth as it is, and confidence in the tools of the aql, like logic, to help us formulate and clarify and explicate matters of doctrine. So the methodology, the manhaj al-mutakallimin, the methodology of ilm al-kalam is defined at least by three things. There can be more, but primarily three things. One is what we call jadal, or dialectic. Ilm al-kalam is framed. The mutakallimun always looked at theological issues by framing it within a problem to be solved. Yeah. So there's a mas'ala that creates a particular issue or confusion, and then the mutakallimun set out to try and answer that. And in answering that, they do it through a dialectical method. i.e., إِذَا قِيل قُلْنَا. Can you see? If it's said, then we will reply. So that's one of the key markers of that kind of dialectic. And if you open up a book like Abu Bakr al-Baqillani, for example, Ibn Fura, al-Ansari, al-Juwayni, you see when they write on theological matters, they're framing it in a disputatio. They're framing it in a disputation, an argument. Yeah, they say, we reply. If it's said, then it will be replied. They say the following, X, Y, Z. The reply will be the following. And one of the ulama who took this to like an art form without a doubt, even though he's much later, is Imam Sayfuddin al-Amidi. Yeah, if you look at his book on Ilm al-Kalam, that is dense and that is scholastic and dialectical. Obviously, you've got people earlier than him who did the same, but I'm just saying, if you want, Kalam at its like proper, yeah, proper pakka or pakka Kalam, yeah, that is al-Amidi rahimahullah. So the first sign of the mutakallimun method is jadal, or dialectic. The second is al-mantiq, or qiyas. Yeah. Now some people say the mutakallimun didn't use qiyas properly. It doesn't matter. It's in their works. They put arguments in premises. And in fact, when we look at Rukn al-Awwal of Ghazali, you're going to see that the first thing he goes straight into is a kind of syllogism, even though he begins with a particular premise and then a particular proposition, then a universal proposition, then a conclusion, rather than the other way around. It doesn't matter. The fact is he uses the syllogism. So Qiyas Aristotelis, so using Aristotelian logic, syllogism was a defining feature of the method of the mutakallimun. The third aspect that defines the methodology of the mutakallimun is ta'wil. That is interpreting religious texts or claims in a non-literal way. So, things like yadullahi fawqa aydihim, the yad here cannot mean hand. We have to depart from the literal meaning for it being Allah's protection and things like that. And we'll go over that because Ghazali gives a structure, a way, a framework of how to interpret religious texts metaphorically or figuratively. So that's ta'wil. These are the three things that define the methodology of the mutakallimun. Now, what are some of the problems with the manhaj of mutakallimin? Well, one, the overconfidence.
Salam, Doc, we have a question.
Okay, tfaddal, please. Yeah, go
on. It's Ustad Imran.
Tfaddal, Imran.
Assalamu alaikum, Ustad. Yes. Ustad, could you maybe elaborate a little bit on the difference in the methodology of Kalam prior to Juwayni and post-Juwayni? So obviously Ghazali's got his Qudsiyyah here, which is more syllogistic. But Imam Shahada's got the article where he talks about Razi and he talks about how he critiqued the early scholars. So what was the difference in the earlier scholars in terms of their usage of rational tools? Jazakallah khair.
Barakallah fiqh. If you mean like those prior to Hujjat al-Islam, like Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari al-Baqillani, Ibn Furak. If you mean these scholars, is that who you mean?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
it.
alhamdulillah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. By the time Ilm al-Kalam reaches Hujjatul Islam, you've had Ibn Sina's influence already seeping in. Yeah, so you have elements of philosophy that find its way into Ilm al-Kalam. But prior to that, to Ibn Sina's changing the landscape of theology and philosophy in the world at the time, you had rational argumentation, but it wasn't always formalized in the way that you see Hujjatul Islam formalize it. So by the time you come to Imam Ghazali, you see an appropriation of falsafa and the tools of falsafa quite explicitly into Kalam. So if you read his Maqasid al-Falasifa, these discussions, Ghazali, you can see are telescoped in, or they're appropriated into his own Kalam discussions. So that's why he's more rigorous and systematic in that way. But before him, it doesn't mean Imam al-Gawaini, for example, wasn't systematic. He was. It's just he didn't always formalize it in the style that Ghazali does. Whereas Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, before him Ibn Kullab, al-Muhasibi, al-Ansari being the student of al-Juwayni, they don't necessarily do it in the formalized way that Hujjat al-Islam does, which I'm sure was probably one of the Avicennan influence. But when you come to Al-Razi, it's a totally different ball game. Razi takes Kalam to a different level, takes Falsafa to a different level, so I think one of the differences, generically speaking, is by the time it reaches Hujjat al-Islam, Ilm al-Kalam is more formalized and robust with the techniques of Falsafa. Whereas before that, it was Jadal, but it wasn't in the way, it wasn't as syllogistic, it wasn't as robustly formalized with the tools of philosophy, because you perhaps didn't have the influence of Avicenna, and you didn't have more of the discussions with the Mu'tazila, that fusion with that dialectic with them. So broadly speaking, by Ghazali, it was more systematic, robust, philosophical. Before that, it was rational, but it was more sort of rational but explicative. It wasn't using the explicit tools of philosophy. So I don't know, Imran, if that sort of addresses some of that. Let me know. Come back if you feel.
I think you've hit on the nail in the sense that post is more syllogistic, isn't it? And prior to it, it's less informal logic. They're still using logical arguments, but not in a syllogistic or Aristotelian sense, maybe Stoic sense.
Yeah.
And could you maybe elaborate? What was the aversion of the early Mutakallimun to Mantiq? So the Mutazilites, they weren't really Aristotelian earlier on because they had an issue. Remember the whole Abu Bashar al-Matta and al-Sirafi debate. Why was that the case? Why were the early scholars? Because it was always there. Mantiq was always there in terms of Aristotelian things. Why did they not uptake it earlier on? And why did they have to wait for Avicenna? Or was he too compelling?
Well, I mean, one of the things is by Ibn Sina's time, rationality or certainty was only demonstrable through a syllogism. Can you see? Whereas the Mu'tazila generally, or early Mu'tazila, didn't need that. Sense perception for them, that was sufficient. Can you see? And they were always sort of empiricists in that way. They didn't need to formalize truth in a demonstrative syllogism. Can you see? A Burhan Qiyasi. They didn't see it as knowledge being conveyed through a syllogism with a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. So for them, it was more empirical, the physical reality, the atom's accident, metaphysics. And that was, for them, that was their focus. What can be based on reality? Can you see? So they were more concerned with the contingency of the world. They weren't too eager about necessarily formalizing it to a syllogism. They didn't see it was necessary epistemologically. Can you see? So it was the Avicennan influence, really, that kind of you can see it seeping in, where demonstrative proof had to be in the form of a syllogism. So by the time it reaches Juwayni, where that influence is there, the Burhan had to be through a series of rational steps that are put into premises. Well, not necessarily, that wasn't earlier on in the Mu'tazila. But yeah, okay, I'll elaborate that more as we go. But feel free to bring that into the end of the discussion, inshallah. Sorry, Imran, if I just sort of cut that off there.
Dr. Shaib had a question. He's left now.
Yeah.
He was the limits of kalam, but I thought you were going to move on to the problems of kalam, so maybe discuss it there.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to do now. So
that's perfect. Okay.
The mutakallimun method is has some serious objections to it, and these objections are valid. And some of you will sense it when you go through the Risalah Qudsiyyah. You're going to see where some parts will scratch your head. You might think, why does Hujjat al-Islam have to resort to this? Yeah. So one of the problems with the mutakallimun method was it was argued to be un-Quranic, first of all. Yeah. So it was the methodology was a borrowed methodology. At least by the time of Hujjat al-Islam, it was now philosophy, theology that was philosophized with aspects of Greek philosophy, Avicennan philosophy, Farabian philosophy. So it wasn't Quranic. So the Quran never, the Prophet never, alayhi afdalu salatu wa taslim, he never encouraged his Sahaba, and the Quran never encourages its readers to go into the metaphysical, always to concentrate on the physical. Yeah. So anything that is within what is mahsusa, whatever can be sensed from the reality, that is what should be the focus of bahth, i.e. study and nazar and reflection and investigation. Whatever is metaphysical, that is not where the intellect can grasp anything. So our judgments about it will be flawed. So that's the first thing. So the second thing is their use of syllogism was never the problem with the syllogism, the argument goes, is your premises ultimately have to be traced back to whether the premises are grounded in reality or not. So if I say all trees die, then I can establish whether that universal proposition, that statement, that premise is verifiable, i.e. is true or not, is sound or not, by investigating the world to see whether trees die. Yeah. But if I say, if Allah is just, then he would never punish, let's say, he would never punish the innocent. Ilam al-bari, yeah? Well, the problem is now that premise has started from a metaphysical subject matter. The problem is the mind doesn't know anything about divine justice unless the divine informs about his own justice. Can you see? So the premises that the mutakallimun began with were theoretical premises, al-muqaddimat al-nazariyya, that were related to metaphysical issues that the mind couldn't form a judgment about in order to take off. Yeah. So if the mind is starting from metaphysical assumptions that are not grounded in the waqi', the reality, then you've got a problem, because then you're just in speculation now. Yeah. So if you start from speculative grounds, you're only going to come to speculative conclusions. So that was one of the issues with the other problem with the Kalam method. That it's not that logic was being used. That wasn't the problem, because syllogism is truth preserving. But the problem is whether your premises were right or sound in the first place. The only way you know that is if your premises were ultimately traced back to something that was grounded within the senses. But because a lot of the discussions of Kalam were revolved around top down, top to bottom, not bottom to top. You started from the divine attributes, which you have no idea about other than speculation. Then you're trying to work down. That's problematic. Can you see? So that was the second major objection to the Kalam method and its limitation. The third objection was the use of ta'wil. So the use of ta'wil was, used excessively by the Mu'tazila or those who are on the Kalam spectrum, whether they were the Mu'tazila, Ash'ariyya, Maturidiyya, the Usuliyun, the Mu'tazila, the Falasifa. The problem is, when do you put dawabit down for using ta'wil? Obviously, ulama did. Al-Ghazali had his dawabit, and others had their own dawabit, their own guidelines and rules. But the problem is, when you resort to ta'wil, the objectors say, you are in effect denying Allah of what he described himself with, because it goes against certain rational principles that you hold to be self-evident and that you hold to be stronger than anything else. So anything that contradicts these rational principles, you won't take it. So one of the principles is the metaphysical principle, مَا لَا يَخْلُ مِنَ الْحَوَادِثِ وَمَا لَا يَنْفَكُّ مِنَ الْحَوَادِثِ فَهُوَ حَادِث. Whatever is not free from temporal originations or changes, it itself is temporally originated. The Mutakallimun use that ad nauseum to interpret away Allah's attributes. So Allah couldn't have spoke to Musa directly, because if you spoke, to speak means you have a voice. Voice means, there must be a change and vibrations and blah, 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 blah. So he couldn't have spoke to Musa. Let's interpret it away. Can see Allah can never descend. To descend means you have to occupy a space. So you have to go from one place to another. That requires changing. Allah can never change, so he doesn't descend. And then so on and so on. Can you see? So those are some of the major objections. So one, it's a foreign methodology. Two, it was the logic that was used was based on premises that were grounded in the metaphysical rather than empirical. Third, the excessive use of ta'weed in effect obviated or took away Allah's own self-descriptions in the Quran and the Hadith as reported by the Prophet ﷺ, because Allah is best informer about himself and the Prophet is the best informer about Allah in creation. But obviously the Mutakallimun felt certain rational principles, if the Prophet's statement contradicted that, it had to be interpreted away. Come back if you feel there's something I missed.
Doc, you're no longer presenting. I don't know if that was consciously done. But...
No. Let me just. Sorry.
Okay. Is this a discussion interlude, Doc? Shall we open it up?
Yeah. Why not? Why not? Before we start the text,
Okay. So if anybody has any questions, don't just put your hand up or just make mention that you have a question, and I'll inform Doc, and he'll open up the floor. Inshallah.
So this is very, very important. This is very, very important because the Kalam method, you see it run all the way through the Risalah Qudsiyyah. And it's not everyone's appetite. It's really not. Some of the arguments that you see in there, it will genuinely think, subhanAllah, did Hujjat Islam have to use that argument? Can you see? Because it just opens up the door for more counter arguments to be made. Can you see? But please feel free to come in. We've got about just over half an hour to go through the first part of the text.
I don't know if people are being shy and nobody's saying anything.
No, it doesn't matter. I'm sure when the thoughts come.
But
as long as you understand that this is the methodology of Kalam, and this methodology is not adopted by everyone.
Doc, I had a quick question.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
When you spoke about the use of interpretation, we have examples from the Salaf using interpretation. So was the problem more they didn't set out their criteria by which to interpret, or?
One of the problems you see, I know you're talking about like the ta'wil of the Sufyanain, so the ta'wil of Imam Sufyan al-Thawri, Sufyan ibn Uyayna.
Ibn Abbas as well.
Yeah, the ta'wil that's attributed to Ibn Abbas from Imam Ibn Jarir al-Tabari and others. So okay, so let's just say these are just opinions of the Salaf, yeah? Right. Obviously they're not hujjah for anyone if they take that opinion, yeah? But the problem is that's said to the Mutakallimun is, okay, so we'll grant you that there is figurative dimensions to the language as picked up on by the Salaf al-Salihin, but the problem with the Mutakallimun, the accusation is their ta'wil was used not just as an interpretive method. The ta'wil was justified based on certain metaphysical principles. And those metaphysical principles themselves then became seen as problematic, because what you're doing now is you're sweeping away divine self-description. So if I say to you, but Allah says such and such, you're like, oh, no. But you know why? Allah couldn't mean that, because this principle, this metaphysical principle we got, that doesn't allow us to interpret it in that way. Oh, you're like, oh, okay then, all right. But what about when Allah says this? Oh, no, you can't take it like that, because you know what? Remember this metaphysical principle we got? Allah, that will cancel. If you take it in that literal way, that cancels this metaphysical principle. Oh, okay. So then you bring another textual example. You're like, oh, no. So then what happens is, what did Allah then mean by informing us with these descriptions? You start to fall into the danger of figuratizing religious scripture. Can you see?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the danger. So what do you do now then? Can you see? What do you do
Yes.
now?
No,
Yeah. So
okay,
it's not that the
it's
mutakallimun.
why they did it. That was the problem.
Yeah, and that's why, that's one of the discussion points I want to put down, because one of the metaphysical principles is that ما لا ينفك من الحوادث فهو حادث. Yeah, that is a principle used again and again and again. So when Allah,
okay, sorry.
go on.
No, there's another question. I thought you finished. Keep going. Sorry.
Tfaddal, please.
So we have a question from Mufti Ikram al-Haq, who says, why do some texts write that ilm al-kalam is unlawful, forbidden, or haram?
Why some texts say ilm al-kalam is haram?
Yeah, maybe the early Salaf, there's maybe some statements, or maybe that's what he means. I'm not sure.
But if you think about why those Salaf condemned ilm al-kalam, here you've got individuals who were doing kalam, whether you want to say irresponsibly or even they felt they were doing it responsibly. But what it was doing is going into these metaphysical areas without a methodology robustly being set down first. So one of the accusations of later mutakallimun to these statements of the Salaf about the early mutakallimin is that the early mutakallimun were experimental in their kalam. I.e., they were picking up new things from Hellenistic philosophy and trying to apply it in an experimental way to matters of Allah's sifat, al-qada wal-qadr, which were foundational issues. And then they were coming up with answers that were seen to be what they were seen by the Salaf as going against clear-cut descriptions about scripture and seen to undermine scripture as an authority. Can you see?
Yeah.
So one of the condemnations was because the earlier phase of ilm al-kalam was speculative in the experimental sense. Can you see? Yeah. Whereas later mutakallimun say, well, actually, we've got a robust methodology now, post al-Ash'ari, post Ibn Kullab. So we're better equipped now to deal with the shubuhat, or we're better equipped with understanding scripture in a rationalist way. And in fact, that's what Ghazali mentions in his introduction. That's what he mentions in his introduction.
Yeah. So
I don't know if that answers, because Sheikh, come back if you feel...
Mufti Sahib, if that's, is that okay? Or would you like to...
Come back. Please, come back. It's important.
Yeah, I think he's happy.
So the experimental nature was one of the things that was condemned. And of course, some of our ulama who took these statements of the early Salaf do telescope them onto all eras of ilm al-kalam, all phases of ilm al-kalam. So you will know whether ilm al-kalam is your thing or it's not your thing. Just like whether analytic philosophy of religion is your thing or it's not your thing. It's not everyone's cup of tea. But because our history has been, there's been polarized and polemicized, how we do theology has been polemicized and polarized, obviously where you sit on what side of the fence is never going to be a neutral thing, isn't it? Because of the way historically it's come through. So if kalam is your thing, then the other theological camp is just going to consider that to be heretical, and vice versa. So what we do know clearly from the introduction, if you look at the text, is that Imam Ghazali says that there are an isabatu sunnah. There's a group of the people who follow the sunnah, who have been granted by Allah anwar al-yaqeen, have been given the illumination of conviction, the light of conviction, and these people he refers to in the introduction, who have been protected from the zayghul za'irin, they've been protected from the people of Ahlul Bid'ah, the Dalal al-Mulahideen, they've been protected from the misguidance of the heretics, who are the true followers, who have been blessed by truly following وَوَفَّقَهُمْ لِلْإِقْتِدَاءِ بِسَيِّدِ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. These group of scholars have been protected by, have been given tawfiq by Allah to follow the path of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, and the Salaf al-Salihin. But look how he's framing the who he's going to talk about now. So he's framing this group, this isaba of scholars who are the true heirs of the Prophet, the Sahaba ridwanullah alayhim ajma'een, the Salaf al-Salihin, and those who have got the balance between the aql and the habl al-mateen, i.e. the Quran, and they're on a manhaj mubin, they're on a clear methodology. فجمعوا في القبول بين النتائج العقول والقضايا الشرع المنقول. And this
Doc, if you're reading from the document, would you mind? You're not presenting, so we can't see what you're reading.
Oh, are you not seeing it?
No, sorry.
Let me just see. Hang on. Why is it not?
You must have turned off your presenting.
Sorry. Let me just do it again. So it
no worries.
Let me just. So what he's saying on here, for some of you might already have it in front of you, is that he's saying that there's an isaba, there's a group of people who Allah has. Why is it stopped? Sorry, let me just try again. My apologies, folks. My apologies.
One more time, inshallah, Doc. If not, we'll just have to assume people have the text in front of them.
Let me just. Okay, let's start broadcasting again. So you should be able to see it now, hopefully. So anyway, so what he's saying is that there's a group of ulama, and here he means the ulama al-nadhar, the ulama of kalam, basically, are the true theologians. They have been preserved by Allah and protected by Allah, and Allah has given them tawfiq in following the way of the Prophet, the Sahaba, the Salaf al-Salih, and their manhaj in Aqeedah. But the important thing is فَجَمَعُوا فِي الْقُبُولِ بَيْنَ النَّتَائِجِ الْعُقُولِ وَقَضَايَا شَرْعِ الْمَنْقُولِ. So they were able to correctly combine the rational postulates as well as whatever revelation demanded. So these theologians are the ones who have correctly harmonized between the two. And so this community, if you look in the commentaries, like Az-Zabidi's commentary, he's referring to obviously mainly the theologians. He doesn't say explicitly, but we know the school that he identifies with, rahimahullah. So it's the Ash'ari school, but obviously that will include anyone else who follows the same manhaj. Anyone else who follows the same manhaj. And what he's saying is that these scholars on this manhaj are the ones who وعرفوا أن كلمتي الشهادة على إيجازهما تتضمنان إثبات ذات الإله وإثبات صفاته وإثبات أفعاله وإثبات صدق الرسول. These scholars are the ones who correctly realized and actualized and shown what the Shahada really means, and what the formula of the Shahada really means. And Ghazali is saying that it's enshrined in the way he's going to present it in the Risalah Qudsiyyah. Can you see? وَعَلِمُوا أَنَّ بَنَاءَ الْإِيمَانِ عَلَى هَذِهِ الْأَرْكَانِ وَهِيَ أَرْبَعَةٌ. So Ghazali is saying that this arkan al-Iman, the pillars of the Iman, is what I'm about to tell you in this treatise, in this tract. And then he lays out what these pillars are. The first pillar is about the that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second pillar is about the attributes, the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third is about the af'al of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the fourth is about the transmitted beliefs from revelation, i.e. the things that confirm the truth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then he lists in the Risala each of these. There's no point reading it because he lists them, because he's going to now explain each one. But can you see how he's building up to what this matan is about? This matan is a true reflection of the aqeedah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as learned by the Sahaba and taught by the Sahaba, as learned and taught by the Salaf al-Salihin, and authentically transmitted to the group of ulama who have preserved this manhaj and these doctrines. And what Ghazali is going to present to you in the Risalah Qudsiyyah is a true reflection of that belief. So the question now is, Ghazali's framed orthodoxy in this way. So anyone according to him now who has anything different according to the way that Risalah has presented them, quite technically may not be within the orthodox field, in the orthodox realm. So first of all, the question is going to be asked is, this taxonomy of creed, is that itself, is that something that is something we need to accept? What if someone doesn't accept that the arkan of Iman is in these 4 pillars with these 10 fundamentals? What do you say? What if someone doesn't reject that structure? Because there's a lot of discussion today, isn't there, about whether the structure of our texts are revelation or whether the contents that these structures are reflecting, that's revelation. What do people think about that before we move on to the first rukn al-awwal? Or any questions on this about who he's how he's framing it? Because if you look in the commentary, the Asabat al-Sunnah here refers to the Ahl al-Sunnah, and someone like Imam al-Zabidi says that the Ahl al-Sunnah are only 4 people really: the Muhaddithun, wal-Sufiyya, wal-Asha'ira, wal-Maturidiyya. There's only 4 that comprise Sunni Islam. And what do people think about that? I mean,
anybody's any questions?
so it's the mutakallimun then that are the correct heirs of, obviously he means the mutakallimun like from those whom after Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, but before Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari as well, but who follow that manhaj. Now this is different, right? The way he set out his aqeedah is different from the aqeedah of Imam al-Nasafi, the aqeedah of Imam al-Tahawi, the aqeedah of Raziyain, for example, the 2 Razis, the aqeedah of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, Ibn Abd al-Barr, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, al-Ash'ari himself, actually. If you're looking at al-Maqalat al-Islamiyyin. So what do you think about the structure? Is Ghazali saying that the structure is sound and correct, or just what the structures, the contents that it's reflecting? And are the ulama of Kalam the true heirs of the Aqeedah Sahihah?
Ustad Imran has a question.
Oh, okay.
Salcom, yeah, so in terms of the structure stuff, from what I can see, and these are just my feelings in a sense, it seems to be very systematic. It just starts from, God, his asal, his attributes. It seems from starts with God in a sequential sense. When you see other matun and other texts, creedal texts or scriptural texts, they seem to be on occasions quite jumbled in terms of their systemization. So if you look at it purely from a thematical kind of perspective, it's very systematic. Yeah. Now, in terms of the kalam thing, the methodological issue that you raise, you can't really see the kalam at the moment, even though he's talking about mutakallimun, but you don't see him talking about the source of the kalam, epistemology, metaphysics, ontology.
He doesn't go through that at all. He doesn't go through that
therefore,
at all.
It seems to be a quasi-kalamic slash dogmatic text or a scriptural text, because he's saying these are the dogmatic points, and the presumption is these are kalamic. So I'm not sure, maybe it's a kalam text or a quasi-kalam text, but it isn't a kalam text similar to the Iqtisad or even other types of kalam text, which has got a kind of preamble to it, which is all the speculative stuff that you elaborated upon, where they go into all the kind of rudimentary principles.
It's very interesting here that he doesn't go through epistemology first. It's very interesting. Whereas if you look in the Aqeedah al-Nasafiyya, for example, Imam al-Nasafi goes through what are your sources of knowledge, isn't it? So he goes through the epistemology first. It's very interesting. It's very interesting, that variation. And I don't know, what do people think about why he might not have included epistemology in there? Because all the Maturidi manuals have that, which is quite interesting. Obviously, the Tahawiyya is not a Kalam text, right? So he's got nothing like this in it. So yeah, so it's interesting. It's interesting. Okay. Any questions before we start to read? Hopefully by the end of the hour, half hour, we can go through the first Rukn al-Awwal at least.
Maulana Harun is asking,
Oh,
isn't the Risalah? Oh, I don't know if he wants to ask this himself.
yes,
You can
yeah,
turn
of
the mic
course.
on if you want to ask any questions yourself. Sheikh Harun, just turn on your mic and ask away.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask. I mean, this Risala is, at least in Iḥyāʻ, it's situated within the Iḥyāʻ, right? So
Definitely.
So Imam Ghazali talks about this in Kitab al-Ilm, I guess.
Yes.
Which is right at the beginning. So I presume this has already been, some of this has already been touched upon in the first kitab, and therefore he doesn't feel the need, I guess, to talk about it.
No, you're right. But the problem is, yeah, you're right, Maulana. That's very, very important because he does put it in. He does have a section. He does have the Kitab al-Ilm before he does the Kitab al-Aqeedah. But the problem is he wrote. Not the problem, but the point is he wrote the Risala before he put it in the Iḥyāʻ. You can see. He wrote it as an independent tract. So when he wrote it, he didn't include the epistemology in it. But he felt the tract was beautiful enough, good enough to put into the Iḥyāʻ later. So obviously he stitched it into the Iḥyāʻ. But he wrote the Risala before. So when he wrote it and he taught it, he didn't have it's how we see it now. It's how we see the text now. That's how he initially wrote it and taught it while he was in the Zawiyah, Bab al-Rahmah. So I know your point there. Definitely, once he's put it into the Iḥyāʻ, he doesn't have to contextualize it because he's got Kitab al-Ilm before that. But when he wrote it, yeah, he didn't. When he wrote it, it's exactly as we have it now.
Yeah, there's just two things that I guess. Number one is that doesn't really make it shouldn't really matter in the sense that it could still be plausible that he already had it in his mind and he just sort of wrote it down. Also, obviously, there's always the argument that you can make, and I'm not familiar with the chronology of his other texts, but he's written other books on usul. And so were they? Is it okay? So you need to read the other text to sort of understand. Some of what he's writing. There's just some reflections, really.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. Jazakallah khairan. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Ghazali knows his epistemology and he's written extensively in other works. But it's interesting that difference between, and I put this as one of the questions in the general questions. There's a difference between how Maturidi text include what they include in their Aqeedah, yeah, even stuff that is not strictly matters of creed, but got wrapped up with theological polemics like Mas'al al-Khuffayn and things like that. Nabidh, isn't it? Nabidh, you're going to find that in the Al-Aqeedah al-Nasafiyya. What's a fruit beverage doing in a text of Aqeedah, right? وَلَا نُحَرِّمُ النَّبِيذ, isn't it? So, but Ghazali's not collecting Aqeedah in that way. It seems to be that he's trying to give a systematic exposition of the fundamentals of Aqeedah. And I don't know, this is a speculation. Maybe he even thinks epistemology is even important for these fundamental things. Maybe. I don't know. Allahu A'lam. For him, it's more understanding what the barahin are, the proofs are. Allah knows best. That could be just a wild speculation. Because never once in the Risala does he come back to an epistemological point. He never comes back to an epistemological point that, this is beyond the senses. We can't say anything on that. The mind can never grasp this, or this is not one of the routes to knowledge, or this is sophistry, or this is not a right epistemology. This is not a right tool for gaining knowledge. He never makes any references like that at all.
We have a question on epistemology again. One of the brothers, I think Brother Shahir, Ustad Shahir, is asking, could we possibly extract some epistemology from the khutbah, from his introduction?
You don't have to extract it from the khutbah, but please do. You're going to get it now. You're going to get some of his epistemology now, and this is going to be my next discussion question. But from that, I'm more interested in, yeah, please, by all means, if you can extract an epistemology, let me know what you think his theory of knowledge can be from the khutbah, yeah? But I'm more interested in why he's framed orthodoxy in this way. Why he's made the genealogy. Look at every khutbah always mentions of Aqeedah, always mentions a genealogy, isn't it? Everyone wants to go back to, but he never names anyone. Imam al-Tahawi names the figures explicitly. Who does he link it back to?
Imam Abu Hanifa.
That's right, exactly. This is the Aqeedah of the two students of Imam Abu Hanifa, and then back to the Sheikh himself. So that's an explicit link to a personality or a figure. Maybe Hujjatul Islam, Allah knows best, is saying that this creed, I'm not naming anyone because this is a universal creed. You know, this is across the board. I'm not making it exclusive to a particular person, a region. This is not the Aqeedah of the Khurasaniyin. This is not the Aqeedah of al-Baghdadiyin. Can you see? So Allah knows best. We may have to think about that. Yeah.
Maybe we could hold off that.
Exactly.
Let people mull over that.
But if Mullah Shaheen can extract an epistemology from
not Mullah Shaheen, this is a Shahid from America.
Shahid, sorry.
One of the brothers from America. We have a few brothers who are awake at 5 or 6 a.m. in America.
Ahlan wa sahlan, Shuyukh. My apologies, Mullah Shahid. If you feel you can extract an epistemology or you got some indications on that, throw it in for us. Tafaddal, yeah, whenever you want. Okay. So the Rukn al-Awwal.
Doc, you're not presenting anymore.
Okay. Sorry.
No,
my apologies to everyone about my lame technological
struggles.
Yeah, in the evolutionary scale, I'm a Neanderthal when it comes to this. Yeah. So all right. So Ar-Rukn al-Awwal. So what's the Rukn al-Awwal? أركان الإيمان معرفة ذات الله سبحانه وتعالى, and that's 10 usul, and that's 10 fundamentals, isn't it? So what's the first fundamental or the first foundation of this rukun? The first one, he says, الأصل الأول معرفة وجوده تعالى. So the first fundamental we need to know, according to Ghazali, is you've got to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists.
Oh my gosh, I can't.
And the best thing that will guide you to that is, and the path, the thing that will take you to that conclusion in the most optimal and illuminating way is the bayan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he says, فَلَيْسَ بَعْدَ بَيَانِ اللَّهِ بَيَانُ. And what other better, can there be anything beyond the bayan or the guidance of Allah or the exposition of Allah than Allah's words himself?
Doc, I think your daughter's voice is a bit overshadowing you slightly. Yeah.
So is that, can we say anything beyond the words of Allah? So he goes through this, he mentions the statement, then he goes through some ayat, which the tafasir I think are well known. I don't really want to go through the tafasir. And Imam al-Zabidi goes through some of these meanings in his commentary on the Iḥyāʻ, on this text from this commentary of the Iḥyāʻ. So I don't really want to go through it. But Ghazali picks again ayat that again force us to think about creation, i.e. the tangible reality. This is al-waqi' al-mahsus. You can see, this is the tangible reality. And that's, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is what the Quran exhorts to, whereas the mutakallimun were more metaphysical. They started from metaphysical premises. So I don't know, wallahi, as Allah knows best. I'm just speculating. This is maybe a structural feature of the text where Ghazali is giving his point of view that maybe ultimately the revelation is sufficient for you, because he reiterates his point a bit further down, and I'll read it. Maybe revelation is sufficient to lead you to the truth that there's a creator. It's not complicated. I.e. there's nothing that needs to be, no one needs to take a course in mantiq or ironically a course in theology to understand that there's an existence of a supreme creator who created everything and designed everything. Yeah, and it's interesting what Ghazali picks these verses, and so he goes through them. And then what does he mention at the end? He says, why do we bring these? And we are, he brings these obviously to agitate the thinking in us. Maybe to agitate the fitrah, Allah knows best, because he's going to mention the fitrah at the bottom. Maybe to activate the fitrah into acknowledge or awakening the fitrah. That you know what? You know deep down there's a creator. Look, the Quran tells you, the Lord is telling us that he look around and investigate. So, and then then he says, look, I've mentioned all these ayat. وَلَيْسَ يُخْفَى عَلَى مَنْ مَعَهُ أَدْنَى مُسْكَةٍ مِنَ الْعَقْلِ. And anyone who's even got a semblance of an intellect, minimum amount of intelligence, if they reflect, إذا تأمل بأدنى فكره مضمون هذه الآيات وأدار نظره على عجائب الخلق خلق الله الأرض والسماوات وبدائع فطرة الحيوان والنبات. And he goes on أن هذا الأمر العجيب والترتيب المحكم لا يستغني عن صانع يدبره. So anyone who even thinks, you've got little amount of intelligence, just a semblance of intelligence and aql, ponders on God's creation and the heavens and the earth and the wonders, the ajaib, the marvels that he finds in animals and plants, the well-ordered system. How can all this come without a maker? So you see a design argument in here, isn't it? Can this not lead us to the fact that there's a sani', a creator, and a mudabbir, an organizer and planner of all this, someone who manages creation? Can you see? So he goes through these sort of empirical evidences to indicate that there must be an intelligence behind these empirical facts. And in my commentary on the Risalah, I put down, I think, about 7 or 8 Ghazali inspired, and a couple of them are explicitly from Ghazali inspired design arguments. And you can make reference to that if you want. But then this is where I want to open up the discussion, because he says, فَإِذًا فِي فِطْرَةِ الْإِنسَانِ, and we're on page, on the screen, you should be able to see it. فَإِذًا في فطرة الإنسان وشواهد القرآن ما يغني عن إقامة البرهان. So there is then, in the nature of man, apparently in human anthropology, and in what the Quran has just told us about creation, sufficient evidence that makes the use, or إقامة البرهان, that makes the use of logical proof or demonstrative proof superfluous. It's not necessary. But the only reason why he brings it in, and it's quite neat the way he does this though, and he does it in quite rhyming language. He says, ولكن على سبيل الاستظهار والاقتداء بعلماء النظار نقول من بداية العقول أن الحادث لا يستغني من حدوثه عن سبب يحدثه. So he says, however, I know that proof is not necessary, but I'm going to follow the way of the ulama of kalam, the theologians of the past who I talked about in my introduction, and give you a proof that's very self-evident. And then he goes into his kalam cosmological argument, which we'll look at. But it's the question here about the fitra epistemology that I want to go back to. He says, فَإِذًا فِي فِطْرَةِ الْإِنسَانِ وَشَوَاهِدِ الْقُرْآنِ ما يغني عن إقامة البرهان. Aren't you and I enough proof? Isn't the Quran what the Quran told us to ponder about? Isn't that sufficient proof to show that there is a creator? So is Ghazali saying that logical proofs or rational proofs are sufficient, but they're not necessary? Because we can prove the existence of God using another means. If it was necessary and sufficient, then logical proofs would have been the only way to establish the existence of God. But that's clearly false, because the existence of God can be proven via the Quran, Ghazali saying, and through your own selves. Proof. Where the proof? What do people think about that? A fitra epistemology, i.e., some people say we don't even need any proofs, i.e., the anti-evidentialist. Fitra is sufficient, or yeah, I'll throw it out there.
Doc, I have a question actually on this one.
Tfaddal.
So the fitra being the primary proof of the existence of Allah Jalla wa Ala seems to be the primary argument of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah and those that follow him, so Ibn Qayyim and others. What is Ghazali's definition of the fitra, and how does it differ from that of the Athari or so-called Athari Taymiyyan school?
Now, if we look at, if I can just get the quote. Now, I don't know, because Ghazali doesn't define the fitra there. I don't know off the top of my head how he would specifically define fitra. But from the looks of it in the Risalah, what we can infer is the fitra being a innate muyul or inclination or disposition to know, to acknowledge a transcendent reality. Yeah. But I don't know what Ghazali's explicit definition is unless someone can sort of bring that out, and then we can look at it. But what I do know, that as Zabidi mentions, is he says, he interprets, if I know it correctly, if you've got the text in front of you, correct me. He says that fitra here is quwwa ala ma'rifati tawheed. That fitra is a quwwa, a capacity, an internal capacity to recognize tawheed, i.e. that there is a unique transcendent creator. Now, I don't know if that is Ghazali's understanding that he's putting there, or that's Zabidi's understanding of fitra is. So I don't know Ghazali's. I don't know enough about his fitra. I'll be honest with you. Okay. I have to refer to it. Yeah. So if anyone does,
because this seems like Sheikh Saeed Fawda's got some stuff on this where he
Yeah.
That same, it's like an ability or an inclination towards being able to. So once God is presented to you.
That's right.
Yeah, but I think Ibn Taymiyyah is slightly different. But I don't want to.
Yeah, Ibn Taymiyyah is very, very different. It's not. It's more than a capacity. It's an epistemological faculty.
It's like a belief you have from beforehand. Or something.
That's it's not. Well, I don't know if it's a cognitive, an item of a cognitive item. I don't know if it's just that. I think it's more than that. It's fitra is at the same time a tool of recognizing something that you're already predisposed to knowing. You can see as well. So I can give you some notes on the fitra. I'll put that in the Google Drive because I made some notes on it some years ago. This is assuming that the fitra is a capacity, right? Because fitra has different meanings, isn't it? According to the ulama. Yeah.
Mullah Shaheen has a question. Sorry.
Yeah, tfaddal.
Mullah Shaheen, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Doctorna.
Alaikum salam. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Yeah, so my question is actually about whether the fitra epistemology is actually an objective way to reach or to prove the existence of Allah. Because a lot of people use this argument and say, they appeal to the fitra, but they've never really demonstrated an argument to prove the existence of Allah through the fitra. And if somebody denies the existence of God, or let's say we can even take it away from theology and talk about sins or morality, and somebody could view something as a sin, or as an evil. Somebody could look at the same thing as not an evil, and Muslims would say to them, or let's say the people who consider it a sin, or the more conservative Muslims would say your fitra is clouded, whereas those Muslims who consider it to not be a sin, or let's say atheists who don't believe in God, they'll say, what are you talking about? Because it's just an appeal that you're making, whereas you can't really prove it. Or why is your fitra the mu'tabar one, and my fitra not a mu'tabar one? What if it's your fitra that's clouded? So I think sometimes when this is used, or these ayat like فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها, has that ever been explained, or is the Quran using it in the same context that the theologians are using it in? Because I think that question is a bit overlooked quite a lot, and the appeals to that, especially to appeal to the Quranic narrative, it seems like it's guilt tripping a lot of people. Whereas it's not really discussing on an objective.
What guilt trip? What to accept their view? What using it as a guilt trip to? For what?
They guilt trip others for not taking on this approach. Or let's say somebody goes down theology, or they look into Aqeedah, or they look into the philosophical arguments, the Kalamic arguments. Then somebody who's hostile to that might look at them and say, hold on a minute, your fitrah is clouded. Why do you have so many doubts for this is what it should be? Or let's take it away from the existence of God, for example, and let's look at, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. You might, let's take a controversial issue like music. Is music halal or haram? We don't want to go into that debate. But those who would say it's haram could take they could appeal to the fitrah. And those who would say it's halal could say, what's the fitrah got to do with this? Or why is your fitrah the mu'tabar one and not mine? Because my fitrah or somebody else's fitrah might say this is okay, and somebody's fitrah might say this is not okay. So is it really a fitrah that's calling to these things, or is it, or are we just appealing to the fitrah to justify our own positions and to dismiss somebody else? So my essential question is the fitrah an objective epistemology to prove the existence of Allah? Because nobody's demonstrated that.
Right. I mean, we know that it all depends on how someone's going to define fitrah. If they're going to define fitrah, for example, as shaqqa, like splitting. And the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, if I remember it in the hadith correctly, كان يقوم من الليل حتى تتفطر قدماه, that he used to stand alayhi salatu wasalam until his beautiful and blessed feet would crack open. So is that the meaning? Is fitrah the meaning of khalaqa? وَلَوْ مُتَّ عَلَى غَيْرِ الْفِطْرَةِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ اللَّهُ مُحَمَّدًا صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ? Is it referring to the sunnah practices, لِفِطْرَةُ خَمْس وَخَمْس مِنَ الْفِطْرَةِ, and so on, and or is it referring to al-Islam, or is fitrah referring to أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ, the mithaq, كل مولود يولد على فطرة, and so on. What meaning of fitrah are we taking? I think that needs to be outlined first. Can you see?
I think that's exactly the point here, that until it's defined, or especially when all the definitions seem to be talking about a capacity. So
but no, some of them are different, like the hadith that says, sorry, Mawlana Shaykh, cut you off, أقطع كلامك. لا تزال أمتي على الفطرة ما لم يؤخر المغرب حتى. So fitrah here is khair. So what meaning of fitrah? Once they've defined what they mean by fitrah, is it khilqah, isn't it? What is bada'? What is, for example, bada'a, the original thing?
Even that, could you not say that that's more of a state? The fitrah is more of an unbiased critical state to be in, and it's not really an epistemology to prove the existence of God. Because I think they're very different things. You're right.
But once you've defined what you understand the fitrah to be, if it's a capacity, then you need to explain what that capacity is and what its function is. And that needs to be given out in detail. The problem is no one's explicated an epistemology of fitrah. Shaykh al-Islam does to a certain extent. But the ulama of Kalam weren't really interested in fitrah, because for them, it wasn't a way of being able. They never denied fitrah, but it didn't help in showing others the truth claims of your religion. Can you see?
So when Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah argued his fitrah argument, was it an actual argument, or was it more of an appeal? What exactly did he say?
No, it wasn't an appeal. It's his whole idea of what he understood fitrah to be, which is a very complex faculty and capacity together. So he says that it's innate in you, but it can be inchoate, and that means it can become clouded.
Yeah.
But once that innate capacity or faculty, consider it to be drunkard, right? When it's in a state of drunkenness, and then it sobers up, then it can see things with clarity. Yeah.
But again, if until we have some solid foundations, everybody could claim that their state is the fitrah. So until a drunkard man becomes sober, he could say he could think that he's actually on the fitrah.
But
or let's say,
Or
let's say when it comes to things that you can differ on, like the issue of objective morality. So Ghazali obviously takes an Ash'ari argument, and he says things that qatl or killing is not necessarily wrong per se, because in certain contexts it can be. Whereas the Maturidis would say something else, the Mu'tazila would say something else. Each of them could use the fitrah argument.
Definitely.
But then it's not really much of an argument anymore. It just remains an appeal. Let's say you're clouded and I'm not, and isn't that a bit of an arrogant way to go about things?
Well, I mean, he would say something like, look, in principle, if people were not on deviancy, then the fitrah is like a mirror. It will reflect goodness. Can you see? Yeah,
again, that's all then. It's more of a claim, but I don't see how it works as an epistemology to gain knowledge. Sure. And it's like, let's say we're talking to a Christian here, and we try to tell him, through the fitrah to recognize the oneness of God and not the Trinity. Then how would we take him through the fitrah? How would we take him bring him onto Tawheed through a fitri argument? Could we even do that?
Yeah.
It doesn't even sound like there's something we could do. All we could do is just say, oh look, I'm on the fitrah, because the fitrah tells you about one God, and here you are worshipping three gods. Your fitrah is clouded. Well, that's not very helpful.
But Shaykh al-Islam will say they're worshipping one God. The problem is their theology is muddled about that one God.
Yeah, so that makes sense as an analysis of what's going on.
Yeah. I know what you're saying.
As an epistemology
of how to arrive at knowledge.
It doesn't really seem relevant.
Yeah, but this is why the mutakallimun, it's the discussion of fitrah is absent in the Kalam textbooks.
Yeah.
They just
rightly so. What do you think that it makes sense? Because the whole point of Kalam and theology is to have objective premises, and through those objective premises, you build on the arguments and you reach a conclusion that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
And the fitrah can't give you that, so it's not really much of a point to discuss it.
Yeah.
I hate to be a party to but I think Imran has Ustad Imran wants to make a point.
Yeah, because I'm going to make this.
We've got about 10-15 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm going to make this the last point of discussion, and then it's all right, honestly, because we started a bit late. I'm going to make this the last point of discussion, and then we'll continue in our next session, inshallah.
Ustad Imran come in. He wanted to add a comment.
Yeah, so quickly, in terms of how Ghazali discusses it within this particular text, the issue of fitrah. Now, if you look at this text, as I said earlier, it doesn't seem to be a purely Kalamic text, because it doesn't really have the baggage of it as a text in of itself. Now, he brings fitrah. It seems like this text is for generally the laity, where as Muslims we have the Quranic verses which talks about Surah Al-Araf, the primordial covenant, and so on and so forth. So you're tying into a kind of narrative. So therefore, for the layman, this kind of a fitri approach to remind you of your to remind you that you accept Allah seems to be appropriate. It seems like a subjective kind of analysis, because you're talking to Muslims already. You're not talking to the atheist or the antagonist as such from a textual perspective. So it seems like it's like a kind of subjective maneuver to say, look, I don't need to give you an argument, because the fact is, Allah exists. You look at the heavens and the skies. Allah has given you these verses. So it seems like a subjective proof from the particular text in of itself. And then he said, look, but I'll give you a proof. I'll give you a burhan. Meaning, then he moves to an objective proof. Now, if we look at this in this context, I think it's a subjective maneuver, the epistemology approach, because if you look at the Iqtisad al-I'tiqad, there he doesn't go to the epistemology, he goes straight into burhan, into proofs, which is more objective. So I think the way Ghazali uses in this text and maybe other texts, it seems to be more of a subjective maneuver for those that are the inside crowd, those that already believe, and then they have an inclination towards, the deen. And even Ibn Taymiyyah, I think, generally plays it from that perspective, because both are evidentialists when it comes down to saying, look, if it's clouded, then you need evidence. So this is the way I see it anyway. I see more of an subjective maneuver for the in-crowd. And then this explains for me that this text isn't a text in of itself for, those that don't believe. It's for those that believe. And this is how you make your iman stronger, or validate your belief Well, that's my thoughts on this text anyway. And you know me, I don't like the form of epistemology anyway of Platinga, but I don't really see that coming forth from this particular texty bit anyway. No,
I mean, let me just make this, and I know we're going to close on this discussion point, but so feel free to come in. The reason, what I forgot to mention at the beginning is that as we go through the Aqeedah, I do want us to study it in a way which is not academic per se only, but as a way of us understanding that these are the thoughts of our Aqeedah, these are the afkar of our Aqeedah, and they've been formulated in a way which solves the fundamental questions of life. Ghazali believes that this Aqeedah encapsulates the answers to the fundamental questions of life, morality. And I'll go through this next week as a preliminary. That this Aqeedah, we were studying it to strengthen our thoughts of our Aqeedah, right? Otherwise, we're just going to study it as an academic enterprise that has no bearing on strengthening our own convictions and replying to people who might object to these points of Aqeedah. But just on the Fitra epistemology, the reason why I raised it for us to think about as well is there are Muslims who do call for a kind of anti-evidentialism, i.e. that we don't really need evidence to prove Allah's existence in any way whatsoever. Now, if they had come with a Fitra epistemology that is quite robust, and this is something I'm researching, and Imran, I know, this is one of his areas he's researching as well, that if they come with a way of understanding, and Maulana Shaheen mentioned, if they came with something that we can look at and examine, that will make it better or clearer for us to see how an epistemology using the Fitra can be used. Can you see as an evidence? So Ghazali is not denying Fitra as an evidence for us, but what he'd rather, I think, Hujjat Islam cleverly U-turns away to go to the proof, the intellectual proofs, without denying that the Fitra is necessary, and that's quite skillful. Yeah, he just moves away from the Fitra without denying it.
We have a question from Maulana Uwais. I don't think I'm happy, Maulana Uwais, for you to tell your wife what it asked. But I don't know if
let Maulana Uwais have the last word.
But he's written his question out, so if he doesn't want, I can just read it out. I don't think it's covered yet. I know he's unwell at the moment, so I don't want to put him on.
نسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يشفيه ويشفي جميع المسلمين آمين يا رب.
Maulana Uwais' question is: did we agree, Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, he argues God can be conceived through the Fitra? Did you get that, Doc?
Yes,
Astaghfirullah. I actually didn't want to speak because I've just come late. I listened to the whole thing. So I just wanted to confirm that the question there, because I saw you were talking about the Fitra, and one of the reasons why I asked you how much you're planning to cover is because I saw it and I thought this is going to take up so much time.
It will.
It's one of those things.
We're being ambitious.
Yeah. So no, I was just, you see, I was reading the text again, and so there's two parts of the text that I want you to bring to your attention.
Yeah.
So if you go to page number 80,
yes.
Al-Asl al-Awwal.
Aywa.
So if you scroll down, I think I want to show you the passage. We're looking at we're there. So that third paragraph, the last paragraph, where it says فَإِذَنْ فِي فِطْرَةِ الْإِنسَانِ وَشَوَاهِدِ الْقُرْآنِ مَا يُغْنِي عَنْ إِقَامَةِ الْبُرْهَانِ. Right. So I'm assuming this is what we're taking. Right. But if you just scroll up again to the second paragraph, you see. Can you see where it says "Bal takadu fitratul insan"? Takadu. So I just wanted to bring takadu into this. So it seems that he's not really final about it himself. So he's persuaded us by saying takadu, but is it really as qat'i as we're taking it here with فَإِذَا فِطْرَةِ الْإِنسان وَشَوَاهِدِ الْقُرْآنِ? It cannot be. So I'm just playing devil's advocate based on what Ghazali's written here.
But what do you think? Tell us. We can learn.
So, Aslan, this thing, what you said before about Fitra, you can't really have a constructive discussion without asking the person what his tasawwur of Fitra is. And because, like you've mentioned previously in Kalam, mutakallimin are all about objective truth, and this is why maybe this is the Maturidi in me, maybe it's not. But I think it always helps by first talking about asbabul ilm, turuqul ilm, epistemology, how we can make these claims, right? So it's, like I said, it'll go everywhere until we don't have a clear, defined, a jami' mani' ta'rif of what fitra is, or what you assume by it. Otherwise, we're blind. We're just passing judgments without
knowing. That's right. We're shooting in the dark.
That's it. So I don't think we'll really make progress. We'll be none the wiser with what Al-Ghazali is saying, if we don't take his words to it, unless he's defined it somewhere. But I haven't come across Ghazali per se.
No.
Fitra.
I just got Zabedi's. He takes it from all the other Kalam books. It's just a capacity to know Tawheed.
That's it. So, like, in a sense, I think Ghazali is doing what the Mutakallim would do in saying that it's mumkin, aqlan, and he's left it at that. That's exactly what I'm saying. So what he wants to try and prove is believing Allah is not mustahil, or mumkin. And then he's like, okay, if it's mumkin, now let's furnish the proofs further. This seems a more credible kind of way of doing it based on the pattern that we know that a mutakallim would kind of function.
Yeah, definitely. So the intellectual proofs are not necessary. They might be sufficient, but they're not necessary. But because you can do it through this fitra way, presumably, or using revelation to prove the existence of Allah. Because that's not even. It's circular, but it's not viciously circular as such, according to those who. So, this is what we were discussing. Maybe he wants to say it's sufficient, but not necessary to use hujja aqliyyah. But here they are anyway for you.
I think I'll add one last thing.
Please.
Something for myself and something for yourself as well. I know that when I read Lamishi last, and maybe Imam Maturidi as well, they're not too keen on kashfi, Sufi emanation type arguments, where Ghazali, of course, having gone through this this process, seems very keen on this. So there's something going on there about whether via the kashf, via the emanation, via the riyadiyat, via the Sufi kind of just asceticism, you can reach certain and I think this might be something in there. Maybe I'm jumping the gun over here, but fitra type argument works if we can claim, of course, if the fitra is intact.
Definitely, that's one linkage. I don't think Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah makes that link, but you're right, that this is this fitra could be what taps into this could be what taps into that aspect of it, that kind of spiritual. I mean, so what we'll do then, barakallahu feek, and I know, wallahi, we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, brings you to speedy recovery and all the Muslims. What I will do then, everyone, so we'll finish at this discussion point here. I know we haven't started the proof yet. That might give people some time to read the Kalam proof, because this is the most famous sort of proof that everyone is familiar with, the Kalam cosmological argument, and this is the Risalah Qudsiyyah version. So what we'll do next week, we'll dive straight into al-asl al-awwal, the argument, and then we're going to go through the premise, each premise, and then pick up the last two discussion points, which was the principle ma la yakhlu min al-hawadith fa huwa hadith, and whether this is a sound metaphysical principle to hold. And the notes are in there, and before our next lesson I'll type up what to think about them for our session. So we'll end it there for today's session. Give any feedback, any questions in between. Our WhatsApp discussion group is there. We can continue in there, inshallah. Have I missed anything?
No. And in terms of the admin, if anyone feels there's any way we can be smoother in terms of our delivery and our engagements, then don't hesitate to put any ideas forward, inshallah. But apart from that, I think and then the recording will be put up as soon as possible, inshallah. So whoever's missed a lesson or had to disappear halfway through, inshallah, you'll be able to access whatever you need to access.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that's it.
I think we'll wrap it up there. Until then, our next lesson, inshallah.
Next week, Thursday.
Yeah, next week Thursday, same time, unless otherwise.
Okay, that's fine.
بإذن الله نراكم على خير. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام
ورحمة الله وبركاته.
المداد يا